in 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, that does not violate the separation of church and state to give families an independent choice as to where they use their scholarships, so long as the government is neutral with regard to religion. So long as the government is neither favoring nor disfavoring religion over non-religion or one religion over another. And as long as it's parents who are making the choice, it's perfectly constitutional.
Colorado, like a lot of states, has a Blaine Amendment in its constitution. What does that mean? It basically means there's a wonderful bigoted law that stops poor kids from getting a better education. The Institute for Justice, our good friends out in D.C., have been leading a cause on this. We've joined them in so many times, and the Supreme Court gave us a huge win. Tim Keller is with IJ and was one of the lead lawyers in this Supreme Court case. Tim, congratulations. I know this tops off years and years and years of work.
Oh, well, thank you, John. Yes, that decision for last week was the culmination of over 30 years of litigation at the Institute for Justice. There hasn't been a single day since we opened our doors in 1991 that we haven't been somewhere in this country defending a school choice program from legal attack. And so many of those attacks have come under the state Blaine Amendments that you mentioned just a moment ago.
Let's start at the beginning. You and I are familiar with the term Blaine Amendment. A lot of people aren't. A lot of states like Colorado have a Blaine Amendment. In English, what is this Blaine Amendment?
So Blaine Amendments are really controversial state constitutional amendments that arose in the late 19th century when a man by the name of James G. Blaine, who was a senator from the state of Maine, tried to amend the U.S. Constitution to prohibit states from funding, quote unquote, sectarian schools. And so sectarian.
Now back then, I mean, sectarian sounds like non-religious schools to the modern ear.
That's exactly right. But that is not at all what it meant to James Blaine and the others who ultimately successfully adopted these sorts of constitutional provisions in 37 states across the country, including Colorado. And in fact, when we were in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, one of the big issues was, what does this term sectarian mean? And what it meant was it was code for Catholic. What you have to understand is that at the time the original Blaine Amendment was proffered, our nation's public school systems were not the thoroughly secular public schools that we're so familiar with today. In fact, they were explicitly Protestant. There was readings from the King James Bible, there was hymn singing, there were daily prayers. And at the same time that we had this very Protestant public school system, we were also experiencing a huge wave of Catholic immigration. And those Catholic families who were enrolling their kids in these Protestant schools found that they were very inhospitable to their religions. And so they started founding their own separate system of parochial schools and asked for state aid to fund their schools. And their argument was simple.
The same way the Protestant schools were getting aided.
Exactly. So that was their point.
This was a guy, if I remember my history right, this was a guy who wanted to be president at some point, and this wasn't even a big passion of his. He just wanted the populism of beating up on Catholics, and so he went around the country, and most states now have this anchored in their state constitution. And our friends who do not like educational choice, who don't like money going to families for their choice in education, be it private or public, religious or non-religious, they hold on to this. In fact, here in Colorado, when we had a school choice program, a scholarship program, to allow poor kids to go to a private school, it was struck down by our state Supreme Court on this very Blaine Amendment. So
that's exactly right.
Tell me what was brought to the Supreme Court that made such waves the other week. This Espinoza case, who is Espinoza? What was at issue?
What happened out in Montana was that in 2015, the Montana legislature adopted what we would call a tax credit scholarship program. So instead of relying on public publicly appropriated dollars to fund a voucher for kids to attend private school. The tax credit program relies on private donors to donate to private nonprofit scholarship organizations. And then those scholarship organizations award scholarships to families so they can send their kids to religious schools. And when Montana adopted the program, it was completely religiously neutral in the sense that the state didn't care where parents used their scholarships. As long as it was a school that satisfies the state's compulsory education requirements, they were free to attend a school, religious or non-religious. But the Montana Department of Revenue, when they were implementing the law, looked at the Montana Constitution and found their state Blaine Amendment, which prohibited appropriations of public funds in aid of sectarian schools. And they said, well, this means we can't allow families to choose religious schools. And they adopted a rule, Rule 1, that prohibited families from exercising their genuine and independent choice of where they want their kids to be educated. So the Institute for Justice actually filed a lawsuit challenging the constitutionality of Rule 1. And we succeeded in having Rule 1 struck down in the trial court. We went straight from there directly to the Montana Supreme Court. And the Montana Supreme Court surprised everyone by agreeing with us that Rule 1 was invalid. They said, look,
a little different than the Colorado Supreme Court.
A little different in the sense that they said, look, Rule 1, a state agency cannot amend a duly enacted law by the legislature and take away an option that the legislature clearly intended them to have. That in our opinion, should have ended the case, because we were simply challenging Rule 1. But the Montana Supreme Court said, okay, now Rule 1 is gone, and we have this program that allows families to choose religious schools, just like the Colorado Supreme Court. We said, because families have religious options, we're going to take options away from everybody. Nobody's going to get scholarships. And they struck down the program under their state Blaine Amendment, even though nobody was asking the program to be struck down under the Blaine Amendment, which forced us to appeal the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. You asked who Espinoza is, and Espinoza is a single mom by the name of Kendra Espinoza. She has 2 daughters. She was working multiple jobs to ensure that they could attend Stillwater Christian School in her small rural town of Montana, and the scholarship program is what really ensured that those kids could stay where she wanted them to be without her having to work 3 jobs.
Let me go back several years ago, might even be a couple decades ago, where this U.S. Supreme Court said that vouchers, educational vouchers, are constitutional in the same way that the GI Bill is constitutional, because the government is not giving money to a religious institution under the GI Bill. The government is giving money to a GI, and that veteran is using it to go to Notre Dame or to some other school, and therefore the government is not spending the money, the individual is, and therefore the same thing applies with vouchers. The family is spending the money, not the government. So tell me why we even needed to have this conversation. Why didn't that decision, and remind me which decision that is, why didn't that just clear the case for it?
So that decision that you're referencing, Zellman v. Simmons Harris, was 2002 U.S. Supreme Court decision in which they upheld a voucher program for low-income students in Cleveland, Ohio, to attend the school of their choice. At the time, Cleveland had one of the absolute worst public school systems in the nation. State lawmakers said, we're going to give parents an option to escape. They can take their voucher to public or another public school or the private school of their choice, religious or non-religious. And there was a claim that violated the U.S. Constitution's quote unquote separation of church and state. And in 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court said, no, that does not violate the separation of church and state to give families an independent choice as to where they use their scholarships, so long as the government is neutral with regard to religion. So long as the government is neither favoring nor disfavoring religion over non-religion or one religion over another. And as long as it's parents who are making the choice, it's perfectly constitutional. And so when that landmark ruling came out in 2002, there was certainly an expectation that we would see school choice programs explode all across the country, but they didn't. And one of the main reasons why they didn't was because of these state Blaine amendments. Right after Zellman came down, there was a debate in New York City with my friend and mentor, Clint Bolick, who is now an Arizona Supreme Court Justice and is one of the co-founders of the Institute for Justice.
Not a good man at all. Not a good man.
And Clint debated a man by the name of Robert Shannon, who was then the chief counsel for the NEA, the National Education Association. And Mr. Shannon said, "We will abandon the federal Constitution, and we will turn to state constitutions, and we will continue to challenge voucher programs, quote, from high and lofty principles such as separation of church and state, down to Mickey Mouse procedural rules like the single subject," end quote. Wow. And so because of that threat, what the unions and those who opposed choice continued to do was to challenge any program that was adopted under the state Blaine Amendments, which everyone understood and knew to be motivated and fueled by anti-Catholic animus, and tried to expand that animus to include hostility towards all religion by either striking down religious options from these programs or striking them down entirely simply because they included religious options.
Help me understand what a couple weeks ago the United States Supreme Court ruled in Espinoza. I know it's the victory. I know they said this program can continue, but did they strike down Blaine amendments in all 37 states, or am I reading into that?
So, yes, they did, and no, they didn't.
This is why no one likes lawyers.
I know. The answer to every question to a lawyer is it's complicated and it depends.
No, that's what I hear from you lawyers. What I hear in the translation is, we're going to need to bill you a lot more hours to answer a simple question.
At least for me, I represent all of my clients pro bono. So I have the luxury of not having to charge my clients or bill hours.
And still you can't give a straight answer, can you?
I know. So in one very clear respect, the ruling from the U.S. Supreme Court was very broad and has direct implications for every state Blaine Amendment. The U.S. Supreme Court said, while no state is under an obligation to adopt a school choice program, they don't have to fund individuals in selecting an alternative to their public school. If they do, they cannot discriminate against religious educational options in those programs. That is a nationwide ruling.
Yeah, the Independence Institute played a role in this as well. We put together a amicus brief. We're thrilled that it was mentioned, and glad that we could help out your effort.
Well, honestly, John, one of the most gratifying parts of the Espinoza victory was a concurring opinion written by Justice Alito. And what Justice Alito did in that concurring opinion was really just thoroughly document the anti-Catholic animus that undergirded the Blaine Amendment movement across the country. And he cited the Independence Institute's amicus brief a couple of times in that concurring opinion, because the author of that opinion, of your amicus brief rather, Professor Rob Nadelson, documented meticulously the evolution of and the meaning of the term sectarian, and he marshaled sources from the time, both in Montana and nationwide, to demonstrate that these provisions were in fact motivated by bigotry towards Catholics. And it was a tremendous help to the case overall, because although Alito was the one who documented it so thoroughly, the Chief Justice in his majority opinion noted that you cannot divorce these Blaine amendments from the history that underlies them, and recognize that these provisions were in fact born of bigotry. That was the quote that the Chief Justice grabbed onto.
It has always been a pleasure to partner with the Institute for Justice on so many fights over the years. You guys have been great partners in this, and I'm just thrilled that we were able to help this one get over the goal line. If people don't know about the Institute for Justice, go to ij.org. That's the letter I and j.org. They've been partners for fighting for freedom for decades. Tim, thank you so much. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.